Today, I'm bringing you must start and sit wide receivers for week 15 of the fantasy football season. We'll talk through all 32 teams, 16 matchups. At the end of this video, we will have talked about more than 60 wide receivers. So consider this your complete guide to the wide receiver position for week 1 of the fantasy football playoffs. Well, at least for most of us, we are talking week 1 of the fantasy football playoffs. So hopefully you made it in. But if you want to quickly pause and look at the terminology I'm going to use today, you can do so. But let's start with Thursday night football. The Chargers at the Raiders. This was looking like a good matchup, and then Justin Herbert, I think, fractured his index finger. He will not be playing in this game. 33.5 point over-under, which is the lowest over-under of the week. Vegas is not expecting many points. Can we really blame them? Justin Herbert won't be playing. The Raiders just scored 0 total points against the Vikings last week. Can we really blame them for not expecting many points in this game? The Raiders are the favorites at home. But let's talk about the Chargers quickly. Keenan Allen, for me, is still going to be a must-start player if he plays in this game. Now, he's dealing with a heel injury at the time of recording. If Keenan Allen does not play, there is not a clear start for me. But we're talking about a player that is averaging well over 11 targets per game since week 6. He's clearly the number one on this team. I know there will be no Justin Herbert, but purely the amount of volume that this guy will see, I think if you're in the playoffs, he got you there, and you should ride him for better or worse. Now, keep in mind, a lot of people were telling you to sit Jamar Chase, another different level of talents. A lot of people were telling you to sit Jamar Chase last week or the week out before that when he went for that 30-point game. We on this channel were telling you he was the number one. There's no clear competition. He's going to get a ton of opportunities to prove himself. That's a guy that you can start if he is your best option. But as far as Quentin Johnston and Joshua Palmer, who's coming off IR soon, I would not personally put them into my lineups. Quentin only had 4 targets last week. Now, he did have 91 yards, which is awesome to see, but not a player that I'm willing to really, kind of risk it on. And same for Josh Palmer with no Justin Herbert. I think Keenan is the only one in play there. Now, as for the Raiders side of the ball, this is a very, very good matchup. The Chargers give up the 3rd most points to fantasy wide receivers. So Devontae Adams last week went 7 for 10. 7 receptions, 10 targets, and 53 yards. Didn't end up in the end zone, but it's good to see him continue to get a large amount of targets on a per-game basis with Aiden O'Connell under center. I think Adams is absolutely a must-start. We know how good he is as a player. In the right matchups, he should blow up, and this is the right matchups. There's very few secondaries and defenses that are worse in the NFL today than the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, as far as Jacoby Myers goes, in your 8, in your 10-man leagues, you're not even considering him. But in your 12, 14, 16-man leagues, he is an option. I've labeled him a spot start. This is just a very, very good matchup. If you need to play him, there are much worse options out there this week, considering the matchup where the Chargers give up the 3rd most points. All right, the second matchup we'll move on to here. Keep in mind, guys, set your lineups early this week because we have 3 games on Saturday, 6 teams playing in total, and this is the first of that Saturday game slate. It's the Vikings at the Bengals. There's a 39.5 point over-under, and the Bengals are favored at home. Now, Justin Jefferson left the game pretty much as soon as he got back from injury in Week 14. He was on pace for 15 targets. He had 3 targets on just 18% of the snaps. We know Justin Jefferson is a 90 to 100% snap type of player, so he was on pace for a huge, huge day in his return. Now, we don't know if he's going to play, but if he is playing, then I would feel comfortable putting him out there in a matchup that's kind of middle of the pack against the Bengals. Now, if Justin Jefferson plays, I'm not playing Jordan Addison. But if Justin Jefferson is not available to go, I think Jordan Addison is a fine spot start. I'm not saying I absolutely want to start him, but if you're in a deeper league, then you can put him out there, assuming that Justin Jefferson won't be available. Addison is a flex option at best. We've seen him have good games without Justin Jefferson, and with Kevin O'Connell as the head coach there in Minnesota, I believe they're going to figure out whoever is quarterback for that team. Now, as far as the Bengals, I know Jamar Chase let you down a little bit last week, but we are absolutely playing him in this matchup versus the Vikings, who give up the 12th most points to the position. Y'all know Jamar Chase can be the wide receiver one on any single week. He needs to be in your lineup. As far as T. Higgins goes, I don't personally feel good about playing him. You know, if you said, do you want to start Jacoby Myers, Jordan Addison, or T. Higgins? Oddly enough, I'm not telling you what to do, but T. Higgins is the one I'm maybe most concerned about. In this Jake Browning era, if you will, T. Higgins is averaging just 3.5 targets per game. Unless you have a huge play or a touchdown, that's really hard to rely on. I expect him to get more than 3 targets in this game, but still, it's just tough with your life on the line to bet on that kind of volume. All right, the second game on Saturday is the Steelers at the Colts. 42-point over-under, and Indianapolis is favored. So, let's talk about these wide receivers. First, for the Colts, Michael Pittman has been absolutely incredible. He may be one of those steals of the year for fantasy in your drafts. He was going way too late. A lot of us missed on that, but he's been on an absolute tear, averaging almost 14 targets per game since the bye week. He's clearly the number one, and Josh Downs has not been able to keep up. So for me, Michael Pittman is a must start. With my playoff hopes on the line, I'd say 90% of people have a better option than Josh Downs or an Alec Pierce. Those are just not players that I would like to risk my fate, my playoff hopes on. So it's not a bad matchup, but those guys have just not been consistent enough. As far as the Steelers go, the same can be said about George Pickens. George Pickens and Mitch Trubisky are just not a good match. We saw it last year. We're seeing it again this year. There is zero chemistry between those two guys. I just don't believe that many people with George Pickens starting are going to be advancing into the next week. Now, as far as Deontay Johnson goes, you got to keep starting him if he is your best option. He's the one that Mitch Trubisky is going to rely on. We've seen that for multiple years now. When Kenny Pickett is not playing, Deontay Johnson is the one that is favored in this offense, and he's had touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. Deontay Johnson, that is. All right, moving on to the last game on Saturday, Broncos at Lions, 46.5-point over-under, and the Lions are favored at home. Lions coming off that loss versus the Bears. I'm sure they're going to want to kind of get back on track. And this matchup is actually extremely simple. You start Amon-Ra St. Brown. I know he just let you down, but this is the wide receiver 8 on the year, a guy who is winning, who is the reason that a lot of you guys are actually in the fantasy playoffs. You keep starting Amon-Ra St. Brown. You also keep starting Courtland Sutton. Sutton, has scored a touchdown in, I think, 7 of 9 games in the last 9. He's on a ridiculous pace. He's the wide receiver 20 on the year, and this is a great matchup for him. The Lions give up the 7th most points to fantasy wide receivers, so absolutely, Sutton and Amon-Ra should be in your lineups. Now, as far as Jerry Jeudy goes, I've been saying this for a couple weeks. There's no chemistry there right now. The team and him are on a different page, and he cannot make the simple plays. He should have had a touchdown. He should have had another reception. He's just making silly, simple mistakes consistently. He just played the Chargers, who are the 3rd best matchup in fantasy, and he put up 3.6 fantasy points. Do you guys want to trust that in your fantasy playoffs? I don't, so I'm considering him a must sit. I'd rather start the likes of T. Higgins, Jordan Addison, Jacoby Myers than Jerry Jeudy this week. And as far as Jameson Williams, he's a fun DFS play, but not someone you are relying on in your fantasy playoffs. Okay, those are all the Saturday games. Let me know what you guys think about those Saturday games. Do you like them? Is it fun to kind of have that on the weekend, or what do you think? With no college football, is that something that you enjoy? All right, the 5th game we're looking at, this is the start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time Sunday slate. Falcons at the Panthers, a divisional game. 34.5-point over-under, and the Falcons are favored away from home. So there's no clear must start in this game, in my personal opinion. Now, a lot of people are going to be asking about Drake London, who's coming off a career game. 10 catches on 11 targets and 172 yards. Now, Drake London was facing the Tampa Bay secondary last week. The Tampa Bay secondary is one of the worst secondaries in the NFL. They give up the 5th most points to the position. So last week, Drake London, it made sense for him to have a good game. And this week, he plays the Panthers, which sounds like a good game. But guys, they are currently giving up the 6th fewest points to the position. JC Horn is also back and healthy. So if you're considering starting Drake London, I would say 70% of people have a better option. Don't only look at week 14, look at weeks 1 to 14, the entire season, because there has been a lot of disappointment and inconsistencies for London and that offense. Now, as far as the Panthers go, Adam Thielen has been probably the most disappointing player who has come back from a bye week as far as their performance before and after that bye week. Adam Thielen, man, I mean, he was looking like a league winner. He was looking like a superstar. And then after that bye week, it's been really, really rough for fantasy. So I don't think he's a must start. I certainly think that you can start him. He got 7 targets last week, but there's just not been that high target share lately. 3 weeks ago, 3 targets. 2 weeks ago, 6 targets. And last week, 7. You know, earlier in the season, this is a player that was being targeted over 10 times a game. So I'd say most people have a better option than the likes of Adam Thielen at this point. 70% of people have a better option. All right, the 6th game we're going to look at here is the Bears at the Browns. 37.5 point over under, and the Browns are favored at home. This should be a very good game. The Bears are kind of resurging. Justin Fields is playing well, and we keep saying this, but when Justin Fields is playing, you start DJ Moore. DJ Moore is averaging over 21 points per game in his career with Justin Fields. Without Justin Fields, he's averaging under 14 points per game. Justin Fields and DJ Moore, they have that mind meld. They're using DJ in some creative ways. He's getting hyper targeted. It's not a good matchup. I totally understand that. But keep in mind, this is the same Browns team that just allowed Puka Nacua to go off, Cooper Kupp to have a good game. So DJ Moore is absolutely in play. He got you to the playoffs. You don't bench him now. Nobody else that I want to play on that team, though. As for the Browns, Amari Cooper was a player that I was telling you guys to start last week. Now, he only had 11.7 PPR points, but the good news is he had 14 targets, and Joe Flacco has just been named the starter for this team for the rest of the year. Joe Flacco has that gunslinger mentality. He's not afraid to give his wide receiver a chance, and he just targeted Amari Cooper 14 times. So I am absolutely going to label Amari Cooper a must start. Bears are middle of the pack against wide receivers, but that amount of target share and the talent of an Amari Cooper, that's a guy that could absolutely put up more than 20 PPR points on any given week. Now, as far as Elijah Moore, I've labeled him a risky start. I think if you're in a 14 or 16-man league, you can consider him, but any 12-man league or less, I think you probably have a better option out there. Just when Amari Cooper is healthy, he's the number one target on that offense, and Elijah Moore needs a large amount of targets to be fantasy relevant. We have seen that consistently for him. All right, the 7th matchup, that we're going to look at is the Bucs at the Packers. There is a 41.5 point over under, and the Packers are favored at home in this game. So for the Packers side of the ball, this is a very good matchup. The Bucs give up the 5th most points to fantasy wide receivers. We talked about how Drake London just went off against this team. A lot of wide receivers have done big things for fantasy against this secondary. I don't expect Christian Watson to play. Now, he's dealing with that hamstring injury. It looked quite serious. I would be shocked if he plays. If he does play, I personally would be willing to play him because it's a great matchup and he was kind of their feature weapon, him and Jaden Reed, when he was healthy. If Christian Watson doesn't play and you have Jaden Reed, that is the best case scenario for any Jaden Reed owners out there. Jaden Reed is coming off a huge game on Monday Night Football against the Giants. He put up 20 PPR points, 10 targets, caught 8 of them, and also ran for a touchdown. With no Christian Watson, Jaden Reed is a must start, and the matchup is absolutely incredible. So Jaden Reed could be the reason some people are winning fantasy championships this year. Now, as far as Romeo Doubs, I'm not as in love with that play. He just isn't favored like Jaden Reed or Christian Watson is. So I think most people will have a better option than the likes of a Romeo Doubs. As far as the Bucs side of the ball, this is not a good matchup. Packers give up the 3rd fewest points to the position. But Mike Evans, despite his bad week last week, is still a must start. Again, you have to consider the entire year, not just the previous week. And Mike Evans on the year is the wide receiver 9. He has won people so many matchups, and he's a threat to go for 102 touchdowns on any given week. And he is clearly Baker's number 1 target. As far as Chris Godwin goes, I know he just had a good game, but not a player that I'm starting with my playoff hopes on the line. All right, the 8th matchup we're going to look at here is the Jets at the Dolphins. I can't believe I'm saying this, but the Jets really missed Zach Wilson. Garrett Wilson really missed Zach Wilson. When Zach Wilson has been playing, Garrett Wilson has been at his best. So it's good for us that Zach Wilson is going to be playing in this game. Garrett Wilson's a must start for me. When Zach is playing, Garrett is getting hyper targeted. Multiple games, over 12 targets, 12, 13, 13, 14, 14 targets. Those are the kind of game logs we're looking at when Zach Wilson is under center. So while Garrett Wilson might not have, upper echelon quarterback play, he is getting so many targets. So I believe you should start him in a middle of the pack matchup versus the Dolphins. And the same reason why I told people to start Hopkins last week is because I'm thinking of there's not a scenario in which a team is comfortably in the lead against the Dolphins. You are consistently going to need to throw the ball. Garrett Wilson will not be irrelevant in this matchup. Over-unders at 40, by the way. The Dolphins are favored, and this is the second largest spread of the week in Miami's favor. Let's see what Tyreek Hill looks like when he's coming back from, Monday Night Football. How much does he practice? The fact that Tyreek was able to come back into that game is a good sign. He's a tough player. I believe ultimately that he does end up playing this week. We'll have to wait and see on the reports. But regardless, if he plays or if he does not, Jalen Waddle remains a must start as well. He's getting a good amount of yards per game on this offense. I know it's a tough matchup, but Waddle and Tyreek are must starts in my personal opinion. All right, the 9th matchup we're going to look at is the Giants at the Saints. Tommy DeVito, the resurging New York Football Giants. Wan'Dale Robinson did have a very good game, but not a player that I'm personally going to put into my lineups. You guys can make that decision for yourself, but I'm not trusting a New York Giant wide receiver with my playoff hopes on the line against the Saints away from home. The Saints are one of the worst matchups for your wide receiver in fantasy football, so you guys make your decisions. But for me, I'm not trusting Wan'Dale, Jalen Hyatt, Hodgins. I'm not trusting any of those names myself. Now, as far as the Saints go, I'm still going to label Chris Olave as a must start. He's the wide receiver 17 on the year, and he is seeing a large amount of targets per game. Last week was a little bit of an outlier, but keep in mind, we say Carolina is not a good matchup. So while Chris Olave only had 5 targets, it makes sense because the matchup was not very good. Now he gets the Giants, who give up the 9th most points to the position. We just saw Jaden Reed go off against this team. Chris Olave can absolutely do the same in week 15. All right, the 10th matchup we're going to look at here is the Texans at the Titans. 37.5 point over under, and the Titans are favored at home. How about that? Now, I don't expect Nico Collins to play. If he plays, absolutely you can put him back into your lineups. He's been great this year. Wide receiver 12 on the season. If Nico Collins doesn't play, Noah Brown becomes a serious flex option. And I think the people who only look at the last 2 weeks will be really angry at me saying that. In the last 2 weeks, he hasn't scored a single fantasy point. Okay? But last week, I was on this channel throughout our streams the entire week telling you guys lower expectations for Nico Collins. You can pivot off of him against this Jets defense. It's not a good matchup. And the week before that, we were saying the same thing when Drake London played the Jets, right? Don't play Drake London. It's not a good matchup against these Jets. Now, if Nico Collins is out, that means Noah Brown will be the number 1 wide receiver on this team. In weeks 9 and 10, Noah Brown was the number 1 wide receiver on this team. He was getting 7.5 targets per game. He was averaging over 160 yards per game, and he got into the end zone 1 out of those 2 games. So look, I'm not saying that you have to start Noah Brown. What I am saying is if you lost Nico Collins, if Tyreek Hill doesn't play, if name a player, if that player does not play Noah Brown is a fine flex option in an offense that should look much better this week, playing the Titans, who give up the 10th most points to the wide receiver position in fantasy football. And as far as DeAndre Hopkins goes, he remains a must start for me, coming off a really, really good game against the Miami Dolphins. That's a guy you can 100% put straight back into your lineups. All right, the 11th matchup we're going to look at is the Chiefs at the Patriots. It's a 37-point over-under. The Chiefs are favored big time, and obviously that has a lot to do with the Patriots team as a whole. They're just not a very good team. This matchup is super clear to me. I don't think we need to spend very much time. Rashee Rice is in play, and that is it. Yes, you start Rashee Rice. He's averaging just under 10 targets per game in the last 3 games. He's averaging over 17 PPR points per game in the last 3 games, 2 touchdowns in the last 3 games. He's been a very good wide receiver for fantasy purposes, and he's the only one that really Patrick Mahomes can rely on at this point. So he's absolutely in play, but I'm not touching another player in this matchup. All right, the 12th matchup we're going to look at is the 49ers at the Cardinals. This is the start of the afternoon slate of games. There's a 47.5 point over-under. The 49ers are favored at Arizona, and this is the largest spread of the week in the 49ers' favor. So the 49ers are expected to win by a ton of points, and this matchup is super simple. You start both of those wide receivers in San Francisco. Brock Purdy is wheeling and dealing, if you will. Deebo Samuel looks like the 2022 version of himself. He looks like a potential league winner at this very moment. Brandon Ayuk is doing his thing. He's seeing such a high amount of yardage in these games. So both of those guys are absolutely must plays for me. Now, as far as the other side of the ball, what we wanted when Kyler Murray came back from injury was to see him and Hollywood get on the same page and build a lot of chemistry and give us confidence heading into the playoffs. We did not see that. That did not happen. Now, if Hollywood Brown is your clear best option and he gives you the most upside in a fine matchup, you can play him. But I would be super hesitant to rely on him with my life on the line in the playoffs. We have not seen a good game really for a Hollywood Brown with Kyler Murray. They have not been on the same page, and I do not anticipate Kyler Murray having a lot of time in the pocket this week versus that 49ers defensive line. So you make your own decision, but I would say 60 to 70% of people have a better option than Hollywood on their roster today, right now. All right, the 13th game we're going to look at is the Commanders at the Rams. 48.5 point over under. The Rams are favored, and this is a game that is tied for the highest over under of the week with the next matchup. But in this matchup, on the Rams side of the ball, this is super, super simple. If you have Puka Nacua, if you have Cooper Kupp, almost everyone has been telling you to sit these guys in the last couple weeks. And on this channel, myself and Badaki, we have consistently told you, do not buy what you have seen. Keep playing these names. You know, Cooper Kupp had a bad game in week 11. He had a rough stretch. And then the game versus Arizona, everyone just lost faith in this wide receiver room. And on this channel, we kept telling you guys, keep the faith. Keep the faith. These wide receivers are going to be league winners. Now they get to face the Washington Commanders, the second best matchup in all of fantasy football. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp should have huge, huge games. And the good thing for them is that the Commanders' offense is not bad. The Commanders are going to be able to put up points, which means you kind of want that game script neutral, if you will, right? Ultimately, the Rams will probably win, but the Commanders are able to put up points with Sam Howell. Speaking of the Commanders, it is such a mess in Washington with this wide receiver room. Terry McLaurin, I'm labeling him as spot start. I would say 70% of the people who own Terry probably should start him. I know he's coming off a 3-target game, but there is no way, in my opinion, he doesn't see at least 7 targets in this game after the last 2 weeks, because this team has been on bye. In the last 2 weeks, all of the conversation in Washington has been how did Terry McLaurin get 3 targets? That's just not something that can happen. And he's open. I listened to Matt Harmon from Reception Perception talking about how he's still getting open at a high rate. I think Terry McLaurin and this team is going to be focused on getting him the ball in week 15. Again, you make your decisions. Your life is on the line. But in any 12 or 14 man league, I really doubt someone has a better option than Terry McLaurin this week. Now, as far as Curtis Samuel, he's in play. He kind of disappears at times and then they use him a lot. It's really inconsistent. I just don't feel good about sitting or playing those other options in Washington. Okay, the 14th matchup we're going to look at is tied with the previous matchup for the highest over-under of the week. That is the Cowboys at the Bills. The Bills are favored. How about that? This should be a good game. Their playoff hopes are on the line. And let's talk about this game. CeeDee Lamb, of course, is a must start. You got to keep starting him. He's the wide receiver 2 on the year. At the moment, he's the 5th best player in fantasy football. So you're starting him. As far as Brandon Cooks goes, he kind of disappeared a little bit last week. Before last week, he had scored a touchdown in 5 out of 7 games, but he didn't get into the end zone last week versus Philly. I do think they will need him this week, and his upside is always, a touchdown or more with Dak Prescott and that offense. But as far as the other side, you got to keep starting Stephon Diggs. I know it's been disappointing. He's let you down a little bit, but man, you just got to keep starting that guy. Attached to Josh Allen, that gunslinger, 11 targets last week. It's not turning into fantasy points yet, but you got to keep putting him into your lineup with trust that he's going to come through for you. As far as Gabe Davis goes, I wouldn't play him. There's just too much risk, but you got to make that decision on your own. I guess everyone's going to have a different opinion. This brings us to Sunday Night Football, the Ravens at the Jaguars. This should be a good game. Hopefully Trevor Lawrence is healthy. It's a 43.5 point over under, and the Ravens are favored away from home. As far as the Ravens go, Zay Flowers has been kind of on this resurgence, if you will, since Mark Andrews went down. He's averaging 9 targets per game since Andrews went down with an injury. He's averaging over 21 PPR points per game in that span as well. So he is 100% a must start in my eyes. In a good matchup, the Jags give up the 6th most points, and we expect the Jags to be competitive to be able to put up some points as well. Now, as far as OBJ goes, this is a great week to start him. The matchup is ideal. He's getting treated like a number 1 in Baltimore. I mean, we're coming off a game where he also had 10 targets. He caught 4 of them for 97 yards and a touchdown. He's getting downfield. He looks healthy, and his snap percentage is also rising as well in this offense. So he's a great, great flex play. I mean, if you talk about OBJ or the likes of like a Hollywood Brown, I'm thinking about some of the other names. A Noah Brown, I think about Romeo Doubs, Chris Godwin, Elijah Moore, Jamison Williams, Jerry Jeudy, George Pickens, Josh Downs, Jordan Addison, T. Higgins, Jacoby Myers. I think I prefer to play OBJ over all those names, given how they're using him without Mark Andrews. Now, as far as the Jags go, Calvin Ridley, I would put as a spot start. We know this. On any given week, Calvin Ridley can put up 20 to 30 fantasy points, but it's just not consistent at this point. He's the wide receiver 24 on the year, and there's no Christian Kirk in this game. Last week versus the Browns, he was targeted 13 times. Now, we only caught 4 of those, which is a terrible number. However, with no Christian Kirk, I know it's a bad matchup, but Calvin Ridley has a chance to have a really, really good game. And as far as Parker Washington goes, I don't think there's been enough trust built yet with him. He only had 3 targets last week, so not a player that I'm personally going to put into my lineups. All right, and the last matchup of the week, Monday Night Football, the Eagles at the Seahawks. Both sides give up a ton of points to fantasy wide receivers. So if you need a wide receiver to save you heading into Monday Night Football this week, it very well could happen. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, both must starts. Both could have huge, huge games in this matchup versus the Seahawks. And as far as the Seahawks side of the ball goes, DK is going to be a must start. The Eagles give up the most points to wide receivers. There is not a better matchup right now than the Philadelphia Eagles. And DK Metcalf is kind of finding his way in the last couple games. 4 touchdowns in 2 weeks. He's really, really kind of figuring some stuff out. As far as JSN and Lockett go, I'm going to label both of them spot starts. I like these guys in what should be a game where they consistently need to throw the ball. You think about JSN in the last 2 weeks, he's averaging just under 9 targets per game. You think about Tyler Lockett, at any moment he could score a touchdown on this team. So for me, I absolutely think these guys are in play. The Eagles are going to score a lot of points. The Seahawks are going to need to throw the ball, and the Eagles can't stop anyone in their secondary. So it's a good recipe for a spot start this week. But I hope you guys get the win this week. Best of luck. There's going to be some difficult decisions out there. We will be live to help you guys out. But that is it in today's video. Go ahead and hit the like button, and we'll see you very soon. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy. Even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.